Hello and welcome to Empire with me, Anita Anand.
And me, William Dalrymple.
Now, we left you on a cliff edge, I know that. But just for those of you who weren't there for our first episode, we are in the midst of a story of what seems to be a little diamond, but actually is a story of empires, a story of many empires and how the symbol of power becomes this one diamond called the Koh-i-Noor diamond. So this is a story, if you've missed, go back and listen, because we are taking you on a journey from prehistory, from mythology, from Hindu scripture, and we're going to take you all the way through the Mughal Empire, through the Persians, through Afghanistan, through the Sikh Empire, and we are going to plop you at the end on a cushion in the Tower of London. So that's our aim. That's what we're planning to do. So let's just go back to why this particular rock may be imbued with such supernatural powers. Because if you have heard of the Koh-i-Noor, you might have heard that it is a cursed diamond. You might have heard that there is a saying about it that only a woman can wear it in impunity, and if a man wears it, a mere human man, it will reduce him and his empire to dust. It is the reason that we don't have kings wearing it in this country. It has been worn by Queen Victoria, but then only by queen consorts, never by the reigning male monarch. I don't know, we sort of try to work out whether it's because spouses are dispensable. Whatever happens to them, it's fine, next. But the story, perhaps, although as William says, there's so little factual evidence, but it could be because it is conflated with something called the Siamantika gem. So in Hinduism, there are texts, and those of you listening in India, forgive me, this is, it's stuff that you know already. But in the Puranas, in the Vedas, there is a story about the sun god, Surya, who comes down to earth. He meets a king, a mortal king, who is dazzled, who can't see him, and says, look, you're too bright, you're too shiny, I can't look at you. Can you appear in a more reasonable form? So this god, Surya, the sun god, shrinks himself down into a stone, or separates his brilliance into a stone, which is the Siamantika gem. And then the king can look upon him. And he gives him the stone. He says, you know what? The fact that you wanted to look at me, the fact that was important, the fact you did it with such piety, here is the stone. You look after it. Well, this king, whose name was Satyajit, he then dies eventually, but happy, nothing bad happens to him. But he passes it on to his brother. And this is where this curse idea of the Siamantika, they become really joined, fused together. Because his brother goes on a little trip into the forest. Arguably not the cleverest thing in the world to go into a deep, dark forest with your most valuable gem around your neck, but he does. There are many, many bad choices made in the Koh-i-Noor's life. This is one of the first, potentially. But he goes in and he's attacked by a lion who eats him. And the lion trots off with the Siamantika in its mouth. And is then attacked by the king of the bears, who rips him to shreds. And then, William, what happens? It's a jolly. This is, it's not proving itself to be quite lucky so far. And then after the bear king has it, then Krishna gets involved.
Krishna is accused of having stolen it when the stone disappears.
Yeah, for those of you in Britain who don't know, Krishna is one of the pantheon of Hindu gods. You'll see him. He looks blue. He plays a flute. Has peacock feathers in his
and
hair.
He's quite mischievous. Yeah. So it wasn't beyond reason that he could have been responsible for his disappearance. So he's sent off to prove his innocence, and he has a big battle with the bear god, and gets the Siamantika, gives it to his father-in-law.
Oh yes.
He's given a wife. The owner's daughter is married to Krishna,
and
then the father-in-law is killed by robbers who come steal the gem, and Krishna has to get it back a second time. Many Hindus are brought up with these stories from childhood, and it's as much part of people's knowledge of myth as the stories of the shepherds in the stable in Bethlehem are to Christians. Or there is this belief in India that diamonds can be very, very unlucky.
Yes.
And that with a supreme hero, diamonds are okay. But that with a lesser mortal, so Krishna, for example, would have been okay with the...
they were the naughty gems. The spinels and the rubies were the nice gems, but the diamonds are the naughty gems.
The diamonds are problematic. And of course, this may just reflect the reality that if you're wandering around with diamonds, people are quite likely at any period of history to knock you on the head and pinch them, whether it's the tube today or whether it's the jungles of Uttar Pradesh in centuries BC.
Now, where we were previously on this conversation, William, we had left these fine people in Kalat. The year is 1740-ish. Kalat is on the border of Afghanistan and Iran, and the diamond has been taken from poor old hapless Mohammed Shah Rangila, poor Mohammed Shah Rangila, who is in Egypt, but is a sweet Egypt, but is in Egypt. And it has now gone to Nadir Shah, who is a much more austere person. It's still, though, isn't it, on the peacock throne? It's still the head of the peacock throne.
So the Koh-i-Noor is sitting on top of the peacock, on the top of the peacock throne. And it's sitting between Afghanistan and Iran. Nadir Shah is the new power on the block. He's knocked out the Mughal Empire, which has been the biggest power for nearly 2 centuries. And having taken all the wealth away, it's like extinguishing the boiler of the Mughal Empire. You could imagine taking a mirror and throwing it out a 3rd-story window. It hits the ground, it smashes into a million parts. That's what happens to India at this point. Every small town, Jodhpur, Jaipur, Hyderabad, Delhi, Agra, Tanjore, and so on, becomes effectively an independent city-state. Meanwhile, the big empire is to the north. Nadir Shah is sitting in Kalat, and in this one fortress, he has the entire loot that the Mughals gathered over 2 centuries from all of India. It's just sitting in one fort in boxes. And one of the first things he does is he takes the Koh-i-Noor off the peacock throne, off the head of the peacock, and he straps it to something called a bazuband, which is like an armlet. And he wears it as a sort of double act. On his left hand, he has the Koh-i-Noor, on the right, the Timur ruby. And so for him, these 2 stones, one red, one gorgeously brilliant diamond, are sitting there flashing on either arm, a symbol of his conquest. Because the Timur diamond is a kind of Persian stone.
Sure.
And the Koh-i-Noor is the ultimate Indian stone.
But there's something entirely masculine about this. So at the time, it's not that women wore jewelry. These are rocks of conquest sitting on the bicep of a man who wants to flex. It is the ultimate flex. And that's what, these huge gems represented in those days. They wouldn't have been worn by women. They would have been worn by men. They're
symbols of sovereignty. Women did wear jewels, but these kind of jewels, the
mega
megafauna of jewels, is worn by men, and it's worn by kings. And in India, in fact, we didn't say this earlier, but it's a very important point. In early Indian courts, you have a strict hierarchy of what gems, what rank of person can wear. So, if you're an accountant, even if you're a rich accountant, you're not allowed to wear a diamond in public.
No, you wear a pearl, so that's fine. You can't wear anything else.
And it's strictly tied to your rank. And often in Indian courts, people wore almost nothing except stones. And they were an indication of your rank and who you were and what you were. So when you sit there like Nadir Shah with the Timur ruby, the greatest of all rubies, on one arm, and the Koh-i-Noor, one of the largest diamonds, on the other, it's a statement.
It's a statement of come on over here if you think you're hard enough. I mean, to put it in modern parlance, it is a sandwich board of strength, which is these are the empires that have fallen before me.
And for a long time, no one is strong enough to come up. And Nadir Shah, having seen off the Mughals, goes around Central Asia and Iran, seeing off. He takes on the Russians, he takes on the Ottoman Turks, the 2 great powers of the day, does very well against both, extends his empire down to Baghdad, and in the end, he's brought down not by any of his foreign enemies, but by his own clan, because he's become basically a psycho.
He's nuts. I mean, this is not overstating the point. He is. So we were talking about this so-called cursed notion of the Koh-i-Noor, that it corrupts, and no man is fit to wear it. That's the ancient curse is supposed to say. But this is a man who's a very capable leader, who commands great respect, who suddenly becomes a paranoid maniac, who starts looking at those people who are loyal to him, who have done nothing wrong, even if they are blood relatives, and all he sees is enemies everywhere.
And he literally, this is used as a sort of phrase, but he builds pyramids of skulls. He genuinely builds pyramids of skulls of his enemies all over Central Asia. He molds them into nice
really makes you miss Rangila more, doesn't it? Really,
And when everyone realizes that he's totally lost it is when there's an assassination attempt, and a bullet hits the saddle of his horse, and one bullet hits the saddle, and one bullet hits the horse, and the horse dies, but he's fine. But after this, he's constantly looking for who are his traitors, who've taken a pot shot at him, and he assumes wrongly that it's his son. And he has his son blinded and has his son's eyes brought to him on a platter.
So this is so, again, I mean, we talk about these things being Games of Thrones, but I think there are lots of stories from the actual Koh-i-Noor history that have informed the folklore in Game of Thrones. I mean, I'm absolutely certain of it.
We're coming up
going
to
come
one
to
of the
a
big
classic
ones.
scene. But this is, this is a man who. So did he watch his son being eye gouged,
No,
or he
gave the orders,
gave the order?
But then I think he did ask for the eyes to be
bring me
brought
the
to him.
eyeballs of my son, and his son had done. To what our knowledge,
We now know
nothing,
his son had done nothing at all.
wrong.
He wasn't responsible for the assassination attempt.
Wow.
And this is the thing that sends him over the edge, because when the eyeballs are brought to him on a plate, he looks at them, then he bursts into tears.
Yes, because his eyeballs are looking up and going, Papa. It's like just awful.
And he says, what is a father? What is a son?
Yeah, well, not that.
Not ideally.
I think we can
no.
safely say not that. But he gets his, doesn't he? Because so he's a middle-aged man at this point.
So he's a middle-aged man. He's conquered the greatest empire. He's taken on in battle, not one, but three of the great empires.
Is he a happy man?
Well, whether he's happy or not, his family are definitely not happy, as you can imagine, if he's going around blinding them. And eventually there is a plot to do him in. And one night he is in his tent when his cousins storm in, and he's in bed with a concubine. And they take a slash at him, and I think they cut off one hand, and he fights on with the other hand and a sword. And he puts up a very decent last resistance in his tent before he's cut down by all his enemies.
Okay.
There then erupts the greatest night of mayhem in Persian history, because the whole army hears that he's been killed and they go for the jewels. The 8,000 wagons of Mughal loot are still sitting in crates or dotted around the treasuries.
Yeah, why wouldn't you?
And no one is
no one's guarding it. It's a complete power vacuum. It's chaos.
And particularly, obviously, they go for the Peacock Throne. The Peacock Throne is sitting there. The man who sat in it is now dead. And so all these soldiers are going at it with their bayonets or their knives.
Hacking it to pieces.
And there's actually an eyewitness account. A Scottish traveller called James Bailey Fraser interviews, as an old man, one of the men who, as a young man, was there with a knife prizing pearls out of the Peacock Throne. And there's murder, there's mayhem. But while all this is going on, the head of the bodyguard, who's a man called Ahmed Khan Durrani, and Ahmed Khan has been implored by the chief wife of Nader, who's a very clever cookie called Chuki. Mm-hmm. Chuki says, protect me this one night, protect me and my women, and I will give you the Koh-i-Noor. So the Koh-i-Noor, which presumably was on a bazuban, maybe he took it off when he went to sleep.
But she would know where it is. I mean, it's very plausible, isn't it?
She's got it. And this sounds, we have this from 2 or 3 sources, so it's not nonsense.
And it's entirely plausible that a woman who now has no longer got the protection of her husband is going to be seen as loot. Is going to be, I mean, the way in which, and it's still, unfortunately, the way of the world today, but rape is used as a weapon of conquest.
Christina Lamb's done this wonderful
excellent book about it. Yeah.
Today.
So Chuki is quite clever to say, look, I will give you the most valuable gem and take it, but you've got to save my life.
And Ahmed Shah Durrani is a man who owes everything to Nadir Shah. He was, when Nadir Shah first entered Afghanistan on his way to Delhi, Ahmed Shah Durrani is in prison in Kandahar, allegedly for pickpocketing.
Wow.
And Nader gets him out, realizes his qualities, promotes him, and he's now the head of the bodyguard. And on this occasion, he's failed to protect Nader, but he protects the women. And in the morning, after this night of mayhem, you can just imagine it, all these soldiers hacking at these boxes.
Which is sort of blood. It's just, I sort of see blood and gems skittering across the floor.
Literally, that's the case. Yeah. It's literally the case. All by the light of flares and bonfires and things going up in flames. And in the morning, having formed a ring, one imagines, maybe around the harem or however they protected the women, they ride off with them to Kandahar, and with them they have the
Koh-i-Noor diamond.
And then they have a stroke of luck, because on their way, just before they reach Kandahar, they meet the salary train. All the money that's going to pay the soldiers who are still rioting and running amok falls into the hands of Ahmed Shah Durrani. So as well as having the Koh-i-Noor and a handful of gems that he's taken from the tent, he actually has the entire year's pay of the army in his. And this wasn't planned. This was a stroke.
Fortuitous thing for him.
But these two things basically act as the capital, which he then sits down in Kandahar and brings together the chiefs of what we now call Afghanistan, and forms for the first time a country in Afghanistan. Right.
Now, we should at this point say that we do have a very good idea of what the diamond looked like. Because, so we've mentioned that the thing in the Tower of London is much smaller, and it is entirely transformed from what it was at the beginning. And at the time that Durrani has it, I mean, you've said before, I think it's a really excellent description. It's like Arthur's seat, isn't it? It's very flat on the top.
Big dome on top, and it goes down to these kind of small tail, if you like it's shaped like a tadpole.
It is shaped like a tadpole, and it's got these sort of great sort of they're crudely slashed sides, if you like. You know, they're slopes, like big ski slopes.
But it's enormous.
It's big. It's huge.
Size of a duck egg.
I mean, what is the carrotage? I always lose count of the carats on this.
From memory, 250
276.
carats.
276 is the number that sticks in my head as well. That is huge. I mean, if you think that, you know, most people have 1 carat diamonds if they're very, very lucky. 276 carats in this rock.
This is a crucial moment. So we've seen how it was possibly part of ancient India. We don't know for sure. It's certainly a part of Mughal India. It's moved to Nadir Shah, which is a whole new empire. And now we're at the beginning of another chapter, which is the creation of Afghanistan. And in the week that follows the assassination of Nadir Shah and the hacking apart of the Peacock Throne, Ahmad Shah Durrani, using the Koh-i-Noor as collateral, effectively, he summons all the chiefs of what will become Afghanistan. Afghanistan, up to this point, has been part of other empires. It's been part of the Safavid Empire, a bit of the Mughal Empire, a bit of the Uzbek Empire, and so on. But for the first time, you get a state which forms with roughly the borders of modern Afghanistan. And funny enough, this was in the news. This day was in the news last year because when the Taliban seized the Arg, the palace of the Afghan president, where Hamid Karzai had ruled from, and Ashraf Ghani, there was a famous picture that was on every front page of every newspaper in the world of them sitting on Ashraf Ghani's desk. Now, behind that desk was a photograph of this moment.
Yeah.
Behind this desk was a picture of this moment, a painting of a Sufi giving Ahmad Shah the right to rule Afghanistan, giving him his blessing. And this is the moment that the Afghan state is founded. So this is why, as well as being the diamond for many Indians, it's also the diamond for many Iranians because of Nadir Shah, and the diamond for Afghans because it's there at the moment the Afghan state is started.
Okay, so this explains why always the emotions are fever pitch whenever we've toured with this talk. I mean, we've done a Facebook talk, William and I, which started off on one timeline. We were talking to India, then Pakistan joined in. So India has our diamond, give us back our diamond. You British, give us back our diamond. Then the Pakistanis came in saying, it's our diamond, it was from Lahore. Then Afghanistan joined in. Then the Iranians pitched in. And it was quite the free-for-all. So does it make him happy?
So Ahmad Shah, of all the people that have the Koh-i-Noor, well, actually there's several people that have incredibly gruesome ends because of the Koh-i-Noor, but Ahmad Shah is one of them. He then conquers quite a lot of Nadir Shah's territory, he conquers quite a lot of India, but even as he's getting kings and nobles to submit to him around the whole region, his face is being eaten up by a cancer. And at some stage, he decides it's so revolting that he has to cover it, like RoboCop, one of those movies. He covers it with a sheath of silver studded with many... Like
a Phantom of the Opera kind of thing. Yeah.
But even that doesn't do the job because apparently, according to one eyewitness account, maggots keep dropping out from underneath. Sorry, I don't know why I'm laughing.
I do know why I'm laughing. I know. I don't... Listen, I'm not a psychopath. It's not that I find maggots dropping out of this man's face amusing. I'm just thinking back to when we wrote the book together, because this is all, the stories are all contained in the book that we wrote.
And meanwhile, we shouldn't forget, you mentioned Game of Thrones. Meanwhile, the Persians are still looking for the Koh-i-Noor. We know that it's gone off with Ahmad Shah Durrani and he's got it in Kandahar, but the various contenders for the Persian throne are still slugging it out on the Persian border. And one of the people that rise to the top is a former eunuch of Nadir Shah, and he is busy trying to find the diamond, and he calls in one of Nadir Shah's children, and basically he straps him to a chair and tortures him because he's convinced that he has it. And he has many other gems, but he doesn't have the Koh-i-Noor because it's with Ahmad Shah Durrani. And when finally, having extracted these other gems but failed to get the Koh-i-Noor and convinced himself that this man is hiding the great secret, he ties him to a chair and he gets his men to make a crown of paste, which he puts it, and he then pours molten gold over the head of the son of Nadir
Which is
Shah.
a direct scene from Game of Thrones. Yes,
exactly.
so okay, so the reason
I think knows these stories.
I need to explain why I was laughing. I feel that I need to.
This is a whole new side of your character, Anita.
Like some kind of witchy cackle in the background. It is because I started telling you a story, but then quite rightly there was more gore to come. William and I competed against each other. We started calling it Gore Wars.
You definitely won.
We're not even there yet. We're not even to my bit yet. But it was quite something. So William would be in India, suddenly pop up on my phone saying, "I've just found this thing. Are you sitting
Maggots.
down?" Maggots out of his face. And I go, "I'll see your maggots and I will raise you." I won't tell you what I'm going to raise you because that's coming up in a bit. But yes, okay, so maggot face.
Ahmad Shah Durrani,
yes.
One of the big battles he fights, famous to everyone in India, 1761, he fights the Battle of Panipat. He defeats the Marathas. The Marathas look as if they're going to take over the entire Indian subcontinent, and suddenly we're going to have Hindu rulers ruling India again. It doesn't happen because in 1761, Ahmad Shah Durrani massacres the entire Maratha army, who fight very bravely but hopelessly against the swivel guns of Ahmad Shah Durrani. And not only does he have this horrible end, but he leaves chaos for his sons. So his successor is a man called Timur Shah, who rather unhelpfully for a man wanting to conquer the world is a dwarf, which
teeny tiny Timur Shah.
Teeny tiny Timur Shah.
I like to think of it.
Who having got a lot of these jewels, then makes himself an enormous jeweled sort of step ladder to get onto a horse. Maybe extracted from the former jeweled mask of his father.
Yeah.
And he rules a fraction of the empire that his father ruled. And then you get his son, who's a guy called Shah Shuja-ul-Mulk, who I wrote an entire book about called Return of a King, which maybe we'll come back to.
We must do a whole episode of that,
yeah.
because it is fabulous. That book is fabulous. But just in a nutshell, Shah Shuja, you have very unkindly, and I can see why you do it, but there are pictures of Shah Shuja, and you have described him variously as Gimli.
He does look a bit like Gimli the dwarf in Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
And
So what is the
things have not gone well. I mean,
personality?
there is a parallel in modern Indian politics to the decline of a great dynasty. From Nehru to Indira to Rajiv to Rahul.
Okay,
is rather similar.
You may say that. I couldn't possibly comment. But just so tell us about Shah Shuja. Apart from looking a little bit like he should be hacking away at a mountainside, what is his personality?
Shah Shuja is actually a remarkable guy.
And remind us what era we're talking here.
So we're now talking, I suppose, 1800. Mm-hmm. And his elder brother has briefly become the Shah. And instantly everyone turns on him, and he is imprisoned in a small fortress at the top of the Khyber Pass. He gets caught in a blizzard, and he comes into this border fortress and asks for shelter. And now, it's only 20 years since his father, who ruled the entire region, was the all-powerful guy. But now so much anarchy has broken out, so much chaos, that when he goes in to take shelter, the Shinwari tribe capture him, and he hides the Koh-i-Noor in a crack in his prison cell.
Yeah, wonderful.
And I think previous to this, knowing that things were a bit dodgy, he hid the Timur ruby under a rock where he'd gone for his ablutions.
In a river, just under a rock in a river.
In a river.
Mm-hmm.
And so the two greatest gems in the world, one's in a prison cell and one's in a river at this point. So Shah Shuja's brother, Shah Zaman, has secreted the Koh-i-Noor in a crack in his prison cell. He's earlier hidden the Timur ruby in a rock.
Under a rock?
Under a rock in a river.
That's right. Okay.
And when Shah Shuja comes into power and to avenge him, the first thing he does is to send out search parties looking for these two stones. Mm-hmm. And the Koh-i-Noor is found on a mullah's desk as a paperweight being used to keep the sermons from blowing away.
So this is Morvi does not have a clue.
Morvi hasn't got a clue. Morvi's a pious old man, doesn't know what he's got.
A diamond.
And he's just literally using it as a paperweight on his desk. And meanwhile, the Timur ruby's been found by a young student who went bathing, and that's also retrieved. So Shah Shuja gets his two stones back. But again, everything goes badly wrong. He forms an alliance with the new power on the block, which is the East India Company, but it's too late to save him. And he shortly ends up in a prison cell in Kashmir. His wife, who's a remarkable woman called Wafa Begum, then goes to the other new power on the block, who is the head of the Sikhs, Ranjit Singh.
So we've just had an introduction to the Sikh Empire, the British Empire. Do you know what? Let's take a break.
Wait, are you gaming? On a Chromebook?
Yep. It's got a high-res 120Hz display, plus this killer RGB keyboard. And I can access thousands of games anytime, anywhere.
Stop playing.
What?
Get out of here.
Huh?
Yeah, I want you to stop playing and get out of here so I can game on that Chromebook.
Got it.
Discover the ultimate cloud gaming machine, a new kind of Chromebook.
So just before the break, we had introduced Ranjit Singh, who is quite a character, particularly in the North End.
He's a figure that every Sikh knows backwards, but lots of people, I think, won't.
So I mean, ethnically, I'm Punjabi, and that Punjab is a place in the north of India. Ranjit Singh was a baron, a misildar. So he is supposedly, he's a noble, but not really that noble. He is brave, though. So at the time that all those shenanigans are going on with people gouging out each other's eyes, this is a man who's born in 1780. So by 1800, it's a young man, we estimate. Nobody really wrote down dates properly in those days. But as a young man, he rides out from his village across the north of India, and he starts to conquer everything in his path. He starts conquering, first of all, small villages, then bigger cities, then Lahore itself. And he starts to unite these people, much as Ahmad Shah did in Afghanistan, these different tribes and missils together into one kingdom, which becomes the Sikh Empire.
Shah Zaman, the man who hid the Koh-i-Noor in his prison cell, when he's leaving Lahore, he asks Ranjit Singh to help him get his cannons out of the mud.
Exactly. So this is a man who has now got power and authority. Not only that, he shows the Indian side of the mountain range, that we can keep the Afghans out. So almost immediately that he draws this dotted line around his empire. Before that, the Afghans would regularly just come over the mountains, raid, take whatever they want.
Come down,
so
raid
it's murder,
India,
loot,
go back.
rape, disappear. But he says no more. This is not going to happen anymore in my kingdom. And he unifies a really very wealthy part of the world. So even today, the north of India, Punjab, is known as the breadbasket of India because it has the fields, it has the irrigation. It's called Punjab, is the land of the 5 rivers. So it's one of the most irrigated places in India, and even to this day produces the majority of wheat, for example, in all of Asia. So there's Ranjit Singh, the Wafa Begum, the lady that you've just referred to, who is desperate to get Shah Shuja out of clink, goes and appeals to the man, the enemy across the border, who is Ranjit Singh, and says, listen, you've got to get him out, get him out, get him out, get him out. And he says, why should I? Quite reasonably, what's in it for me? And the Wafa Begum says, I will give you the Koh-i-Noor diamond. And he says, well, what's that worth? And she famously gives this wonderful analogy that if you throw a rock up into the air as high as you can, and then throw it to the left as hard as you can, and then throw it to the right as hard as you can, and fill that entire space with gold, that is the value of the Koh-i-Noor diamond.
And in fact, it's quite significant that she has to explain this, because at this point, the Koh-i-Noor is not the big famous stone that it is now.
And also, he's not a man who cares about jewels. I mean, the character of this man, Ranjit Singh, unlike the Mughals, who liked to wear their wealth, he comes from the Sikh faith, which is, comparatively new in India. And they are like the Protestants. They've come in, they're not for idolatry. They're not for big temples. They're not for showiness. He himself just wears white clothes. He doesn't sit on his own throne. He has something called the Golden Gaddi, which is a golden throne, but he doesn't sit on it. He leaves it empty for Guru Nanak, who's the spiritual leader of the Sikh tradition. So he's not really that bothered, but he's bothered about this one, because this one is the stone of power.
And in due course, and this is why he's important to our story, he's the guy, he wears it on his own. All the others, like Nadir Shah and Ahmad Shah Durrani, had worn it along with the Timur Rubi.
So Wafa Begum promises him this rock, and he says, all right, I will help. And he does, doesn't he? I mean, he does go and help.
He invades Kashmir and takes Kashmir. And so he adds Kashmir to his kingdom.
Portfolio.
And springs Shah Shuja from prison. And so he's brought back to Lahore. And they then sit down and they face each other. And Ranjit Singh says, so where's the diamond?
So where's the diamond? You promised me the diamond. And Shah Shuja says, famously, in diplomacy, this happens a lot, diamond, what diamond? I don't know what you're talking about. And he says, your wife told me if I sent men and spilt blood and coin to get you out of there, you'd give me the diamond. And he says, don't know anything about that, governor. Sorry, no idea.
So Ranjit Singh, according to Shah Shuja's memoirs,
now
this is something which is
interesting.
disputed. It's something which is not in
Yeah.
the Sikh sources, obviously,
Yes.
but which Shah Shuja very much puts into his own memoirs. He says that he gets Shah Shuja's son and tortures him
in front of his fathers
until he hands over the diamond.
And the Sikh sources say he convinces him.
He convinces him. So
A deal is a deal, and he should hand it over.
This stone is not something that brings out the best in anyone at any point in history.
Really not. Really not. So the diamond is handed over finally.
There's this very uncomfortable meeting at a place called Mubarak Haveli, which is still, I've been to it in Lahore, where Shah Shuja's been lodged. And the two men sit facing each other in silence for 20 minutes until eventually Ranjit Singh makes a sort of gesture saying, where the hell is this diamond?
Yeah, enough now.
And Shah Shuja flicks his fingers and gets a eunuch to bring a dirty cloth, and it's placed in the middle of the room.
I love that detail of it being in a dirty cloth, which just shows the descent of, I'm handing it over, but I'm handing it over with all the ill will.
He just puts it in the middle, and Ranjit Singh has to reach forward and pick it up.
So what happens next is really, I think, very significant, because here is a man. Now, just to describe Ranjit Singh for you at this time, he looks older than he is. He's got a white beard. If you look at sort of court paintings from the time, he's only got one eye because he's had childhood smallpox, we think, that has robbed him of the vision of one eye. He walks with a limp. He's got a pockmarked face. He's not beautiful.
But he loves to surround himself with incredibly beautiful courtiers to almost compensate for this.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but he takes the diamond, as you say, and he wears it on its own, on his arm. And at this point, this diamond is now really saddled with the reputation that it brings down empires, it brings down strong men. And the way he wears it is almost as if he's thumbing his nose at all powers, temporal and supernatural.
He wears just very simple white pajamas with this one stone on his arm. And this is the point that it first enters the
British notice.
The British notice.
The little glint of the diamond catches their eye.
And from this period, you get the first references in British sources to this amazing diamond. Yeah. And anyone that goes to see Ranjit Singh hopes to see it. So,
he shows it. I mean, the thing about this diamond with him is that wherever he goes in his kingdom in the north, people talk about King of the North in I keep coming to Game of Thrones. I'm not obsessed, but it's just, he's the real deal. So whenever he tours around, he takes his diamond with him. It's like, it's the thing that everybody turns out to come and see. The way in which he transports and protects the diamond is also extraordinary. So his master of the Toshakhana, the treasury, is a man called Beli Ram, Misr Beli Ram. And Beli Ram is charged with protecting the stone. Protecting the stone as if it's a member of the royal family. It's that serious. So the diamond goes out behind Ranjit Singh in a caravan of, sometimes, there are descriptions of 40 camels following.
Each with identical panniers.
Everything looks the same. All the baskets on all the camels look identical, but only one of them has the Koh-i-Noor in it, and only Beli Ram in the entire kingdom knows which one it is. When he sleeps, he has it and other baskets chained to him, his body, so that if somebody comes, they're going to have to rifle through numerous baskets to try and find, where's Wally? Where is the diamond? And in the meantime, he can spring up and slit their throats. So, this is a man who has perhaps the most onerous task. But Ranjit Singh, wherever he holds his darbars or his governmental meetings, he makes sure he has this diamond strapped to his bicep against the absolute epitome of masculinity.
And sometimes it's just kept in, is it called Govindgarh? The imperial fortress treasury, which Ranjit Singh puts all his treasure in. And it's still there. It's this incredible sort of blockhouse. And it's the strongest place in the realm. So just to sort of give a picture of what's happening at this point. So by now, the East India Company...
And they're early 1800s, just to remind people.
By now, the East India Company, which is a commercial company, it's not the British government, it's a public limited company. It's got shareholders, it's got a board of directors, and it's run out of a relatively small office in the city of London. Leadenhall Street.
Yeah.
And in the chaos which followed the collapse of the Mughal Empire, which itself followed the fact that Nadir Shah had taken all the money away and there was no money left to pay the soldiers, the civil servants. The East India Company, a corporation, has gobbled up the whole of India, and it's done it in the most sort of bizarre way. There are only, at the time of the Battle of Plassey, which is the first big battle when the company really gets going, at that point, there are only 35 employees in the head office in Leadenhall Street, which itself is only 5 windows wide. It's a tiny building. And in India, there are only 250 white civil servants. But what they do is that they borrow money from the Indian bankers, particularly the Mawari Jains, and of all of them, a group called the Jagat Sets. And the Jagat Sets and the other bankers realized that these guys actually speak the same language as them. Although one are beef-eating Englishmen and the others are vegetarian Indians, they understand the business of interest rates, commercial contracts, and they may loot, they may plunder, they may do all sorts of enormous...
But they do a capital return.
They do a capital return on time in full, and they don't argue. While often Indian rulers hang up bankers by their feet and if they ask for the money back. So these guys say they may be awful, they may be foreigners, they may be heathen.
But we can literally do business with them.
But we can do business with them. And they provide the capital with which the East India Company buys an Indian army. So they recruit sepoys who are Indian soldiers, train them up as mercenaries. And by the time that the Koh-i-Noor is back with Ranjit Singh, the East India Company private army in India is 200,000 strong, when the British army is only 100,000. So it's a private company in an office in London controls an army twice the size of the British army.
And if you look at sort of Indian sources at the time, they describe these armies of the East India Company as just sweeping across the land like locusts, just taking everything in their path.
And that's what they've done. They've now controlled the whole, either directly through conquest or by alliance. They control all of India south of the Sutlej River.
But they can't go north of the river. And
because Ranjit Singh is sitting
He won't
there.
let them. And he also, so the Sikhs are a martial race. It's part of their identity that you are a man, you must fight. So just a little bit of background on
This
Sikhs.
is your in-laws.
Well, my in-laws, indeed. So Hinduism has a caste system, as most of you will know. But then when the Sikhs come along, and I describe them as sort of like India's Protestants, they say enough of this. We're not going to have caste division anymore. Everybody will be reborn the same. So whatever you were before, now your surname will be Singh. If you are a man, Singh means lion. And if you are a woman, you will be Kaur, which means every woman is a princess. So in one fell swoop, that's it, the end of caste. They also say you will be a warrior saint. So that means you will be pious, but you must fight. You must learn how to fight. So that's also sort of part of the very nature of being a Sikh. And that's for men and women, which is interesting.
And one of the things that had allowed the East India Company to defeat all these Indian armies so quickly is the fact that there's been a military revolution in Europe. You have horse artillery, muskets, bayonets, all this stuff. And using this new technology, the East India Company, in just 50 years, has taken over the whole of India. One office in London takes over the richest country in the world. India's producing about 40% of the world's GDP at this point. And they've been taken over by the East India Company because of this technique. What does Ranjit Singh do? He may have the most macho warriors in North India, but he needs the technology. And so what he does is he gets Napoleon's generals.
Right.
And a whole load of ex-Napoleonic soldiers and officers.
Mercenaries.
To train his army.
His army is stuffed full of European mercenaries.
So you have all these strange men like sort of General Avatabali, who's an ex-Napoleonic general shipped over from Sicily to run Peshawar.
What is the name of the Tartan general?
Alexander Gardner,
who will figure large in a while in this story.
He will. He is literally. He wears a tartan salva kameez.
And a tartan turban. I've seen pictures of a tartan turban on him as well. So there we are. So Ranjit Singh is able to repel. Oh, actually, they don't even try. They don't even try to cross the Sutlej because they know if they do, they'll be massacred.
The artillery is extraordinary.
Yeah.
He builds up this amazing, rather like the Russians today in Ukraine, they have a massive
heavy
artillery
gun
advantage.
battery.
And Ranjit Singh starts these artillery factories in Lahore. And so the British know that if they try and cross the Sutlej, they're going to be met by this hail of lead.
So from sort of around 1800 to 1839, this is a man who has unassailable power in the north. Nobody can challenge him, cross him. No one dares. It doesn't mean they haven't got their eye on it. Especially the British have got their eye on it. And also interesting that they don't just have an eye on his kingdom, but they also have an eye on the diamond. Because the diamond, they recognise that propaganda value of that means power to all Indians.
I mentioned earlier this guy, James Bailey Fraser, who's actually my wife's ancestor. He has a brother called William Fraser. William Fraser leaves probably the first report about the Koh-i-Noor of any British letter writer. The East India Company sends a mission to Shah Shuja just before he's toppled, and they see Shah Shuja wear the Koh-i-Noor in Peshawar. And from that point, everyone who turns up at the Punjab is reporting on this diamond. And the Brits are longing to get their hands on the Punjab, and they're longing to get their hands on the diamond, but they can't because of all this artillery. They basically have to wait until Ranjit Singh gets old and dies.
But they, I mean, even when he's old and infirm, they still dead. But when he dies in 1839, that's their chance. And that might be actually a good place to leave it. Thanks very much for listening to Empire. We're going to be back with more murder, mayhem, the rise and fall of great empires. So do join us again.
Goodbye from me, William Dalrymple.
Goodbye from me, Anita Arnold.